Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Emilia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keeden Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. Carry on my wayward son. The road thus far.
Oh,
Dun dun dun
you
dun.
gotta love it.
I'm so excited for
Gotta
Supernatural
love it.
finally.
Yes, absolutely. I love that show. I love all the characters in it. And it went way longer than I thought it would. And most
I
of
loved
it was
the
good.
show, but I did not last the whole.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I stuck
honestly.
with
Yeah.
it. I stuck with it. I was like, I gotta see where this goes. Now it did get to the point where I would just wait for the full season and then binge it. But the thing is, they always still had that like monster of the week. And so
Yeah.
that always, since that was there, whatever the overarching thing that was going on, I'm like, sure, I'm here for it. Why not? And so yeah, I'm so glad that
Well, and they even admitted just how repetitive they got. They were like, their own characters would come in and make fun of the fact that, oh, here the brothers are, they escaped death again. Oh, Dean's so sad and self-destructive again. And oh, here's I almost said Jared, which Sam. Oh, here's that. So they like, I like that they make fun of themselves for it, but
They
yeah, at a certain point,
absolutely
I kind
do.
of,
Yeah.
I think I made it through 10 seasons consistently, and then from there
That's
it got
solid.
spotty.
That's solid. Yeah, I did finish it. It had a good ending. I did like the way that it did.
I did
wrap.
watch the last one because I felt like, I mean, you have to.
You gotta do that. Yeah, but yeah, it's a great show. Like I said, I love the characters. All right, before we jump in to Supernatural, because this is our Halloween episode. It's spooky season, so that's the big reason.
What a perfect time for us to go into one of our favorite shows that somehow we have not talked about yet.
Exactly, it's spooky season, and one of the things that is spooky to me is the idea of no one listening to us. So I need a serious favor from all of our listeners out there. If you could please, like and subscribe wherever you listen to us. And in addition to that, if you listen to us on like Spotify or Apple or Google, wherever you listen, if you could please do us a solid and rate and review us. It helps us get our name out there more. It helps us pop up in algorithms more. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, our Instagram, our social media. Do everything you can because, yeah, we really do want to, get this podcast out there. We love what we do. We love doing it. And we're just honestly just trying to get the name out there more and get more listeners. So yeah, if you could please do us that favor.
Help people learn about cool psychology, mental health stuff.
Yes.
Without even realizing it because it's nerdy fun.
Exactly. So yeah, if y'all could do that for us.
Trick people into having better mental health.
Yes, trick them. Yes. Exactly. That's what the Riddler would do. Yeah. And
it's
so
really my main goal is to just trick people into being healthier human beings and happier.
That's why I'm here.
There we go.
But yeah, thank you. Yes, so please go do that. And like I said, now back to Supernatural. So the episode that we are gonna be talking about the most today is season 4, episode 7. So if you've never seen Supernatural, do yourself a solid. The whole thing is on Netflix. I think all 15 seasons are on Netflix.
And please, if you have not watched it all, don't worry. You don't have to commit to that. The first 5 seasons are perfection. And that was actually what was initially planned. So don't feel like you have to commit to 15. But we definitely recommend the first 5. And then the next 5 are pretty good. Increasingly jumping the shark, but in its own fun and right.
I like sharks being jumped. But yeah, it's season 4, episode 7. The name of the episode is "It's the Great Pumpkin, Sam Winchester," which
I
I think
figured
it's
we'd go super Halloweeny for a
yeah, I think
Halloween episode.
it's a play off of the Charlie Brown episode, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun. And yeah, we were just trying to think like, okay, if we're gonna do supernatural, what episode could we cover? And what was funny was I looked, and two of the episodes they said they were, it was like one called like Monsterverse or Monsterland or something like that, and that was season 4
Monster
episode.
Movie,
Yeah, Monster Movie,
which
and
is
that
also
was
a
yeah,
solid one. Yeah.
that was season 4, episode 5. And then this one that we're doing is episode 7. And so I went ahead and I was like, 5, 6, and 7. Just gonna do it all. And afterwards, I'm like, well, I think it's time for me to rewatch Supernatural because this is great.
Yeah, you gotta do it every few years, you know? Oh my God, I feel old saying that because I feel like I just discovered it
Don't think
last
about it.
year, but no, no, that was a long time ago.
Don't even think about
Uh. So yeah, this episode, I mean, I think probably what we're gonna do is talk a little bit about the episode, but just generally speaking, some of the trends and threads, particularly of that season.
it. Hmm.
But so that episode, I think it's they discovered there are some witches. There's a witch going around and killing people,
Yep.
and so they're trying to find the witch. And the longer thread of this season is Dean has come back from hell. So
Hmm.
he was sent to hell. He's back from hell and he was saved by angels. And so essentially the angels are setting the Winchesters out to prevent seals of hell, I think, essentially from being broken.
Right.
Because then what is it, Lilith? Somebody walks the earth that would be really terrible
The
and
devil.
unleashes the devil. There you
Yeah.
go. The devil. That sounds
Yep.
bad, right? So the devil will come out if you guys don't help us. So they find out that there's a seal involved and they have to prevent this demon from coming back that this witch is trying to bring. So yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, there's the monsters of the week, but I think the reason that we chose this episode instead of the monster movie is it hits a little bit more. You get these little snippets of Dean and just so for Dean, you get these snippets that oh, he actually remembers hell.
Yeah.
And so what is it like to be someone who's been through literal hell and then you're back to everyday life and how do
Right.
you deal with it? Kind of the Buffy scenario. I'm now realizing they essentially stole that from Buffy, but
Didn't watch
you
Buffy.
come oh, so you
Colleen loves Buffy.
I
So
yeah, I do in fact Buffy. So, how do you come back after you've gone through hell and now you're plopped in everyday life. And then Sam's dealing with the fact that here are angels and he believes in God and and has certain ideas of what all these things are and then he's realizing angels aren't the wonderful.
never beat your heroes.
Yeah, never meet your heroes essentially. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of just like the wool being pulled out from over his eyes. And so there's just a lot of subtle hints about larger questions for them in this season that I think are really cool in this episode.
Now, what Dean is experiencing, that is, correct me if I'm wrong here, but that is completely post traumatic stress, correct?
Technically speaking, I think he has acute stress disorder.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm learning something new. Okay.
So, because of the timing. So, when it comes to PTSD, there's a trauma that has happened in the past that there are overlapping theories and things, but to simplify things, essentially, you have a trauma, big T trauma is what we say. So, something that risked life or limb, or you witnessed, or some experience where it really has to do with safety and survival and life, that sort of thing. And your brain gets stuck. It
Okay.
essentially overcompensates and it gets stuck in the trauma. And so you're replaying the trauma. Um, how you approach life is completely changed by that trauma in a way that makes it so that you're not able to actually function in everyday life. And so acute stress disorder is essentially a recognition that um, right after a trauma happens, you got to process it. And so there can be a lot of these symptoms that look like PTSD that start up right after the trauma happens, but some of that might just be the brain processing through, and some brains it takes more than others. And so acute stress disorder, in a lot of ways, you can think of it as the early onset, the potential early onset of PTSD, essentially right after the trauma happens. Pretty much those same types of symptoms, but not everyone that gets acute stress disorder is going to then have that followed by PTSD,
So,
because some of it
okay.
might just purely be that some people are needing a little bit more time right after the trauma to adjust and process.
So, would you say acute stress disorder is normally something that is just temporary?
So acute stress disorder, if it ends up lasting for a long period of time, then you're shifting into PTSD territory,
Okay.
because it literally acute. This is something that has recently happened. And in general, you would expect someone to have, so like with Dean, um he's definitely trying to avoid thinking about it. He even lies about remembering hell, and you start like seeing snippets, hints, um, that oh, he's not telling everything in this episode. So he tries to avoid talking about it, thinking about it. Um, in this episode, you also see him getting triggered, and he even has like it seems like a quick flashback happen. So he
Mhm.
sees these like art
Yeah, the scary
masks for
masks.
Halloween. Yeah,
Yeah.
the scary masks, and one of them reminds him of images from hell, and so it shows him essentially flashing back as if he's there. So you're seeing a few things that would suggest that he has acute stress disorder,
Mhm.
uh, which absolutely can then lead to PTSD. And so, right after the trauma, you don't call it PTSD just because it's like, hey, let's normalize the fact that you're dealing with a lot right after a trauma happens.
Okay.
And not everyone that has those reactions right afterward then has PTSD overall. Um, but yeah, so he has probably acute stress disorder right now. That's what it's seeming like. And if it doesn't go down, if he's not able to find ways to process through it over the next bit of time, then it would be considered PTSD.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Well, okay. So, I feel like with this show and what the brothers go through, they're in a constant state of just new acute stress disorder from something
You're hitting on something very
something happening.
interesting.
Okay.
Yes. So it can be really hard to, yeah, to figure things out when someone's literally having traumas happening. So this has come up in other episodes before. I can't remember which ones, but I've mentioned before, like let's say someone is in has intimate partner violence, where they are in a situation where they're being abused. They could very well have all of the characteristic symptoms of acute stress disorder, PTSD, and we might even consider it to be PTSD because some of those traumas happened long ago. But it's complicated when someone is not actually in a stable, safe environment yet. Um, another example too that I think actually compares even more similarly to the Winchesters is take people in the military.
Mhm.
And so you are fighting and you are in combat mode, you're doing all of these things. And so some of the things that you might set aside is very normal because you got to get the job done.
Right.
And so that's why you see things like high levels of substance use, for example. And you even have like cultures that encourage you to numb yourself out. And we see that with the Winchesters, especially Dean, a lot
Mhm.
of the time. he's drinking a
Right.
lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so you see a lot of those things because you have someone who they're going into battle, they need to be ready, and they've got all this trauma that their brain is needing to process, but they don't have the time and the wherewithal yet. And
Okay.
then once you're out of it and you have a moment to rest, it's all flooding you, and it's more than you can handle, and you also don't know how to feel it. You only know how to push it back so you can battle. So when the
Right.
battle's over, you don't know what to do with it, right? So there's a lot of stuff that for them I see as comparable to military. Even the hunter culture, so fighting monsters and things, like you see the hunters and they meet up with each other and whatnot. Like there's very much a culture and a camaraderie in some ways. And um yeah,
Yeah.
you're hitting the nail on the head. It's very tricky, and it would essentially be very hard to work through some of these things when he's actively fighting demons all the time.
Hmm.
Hell's coming up on a regular basis for him.
Right.
He's got a lot of triggers, but he's also trying to blur them out, numb them out so he can keep putting one foot in
Just
front of the other.
get through it.
But
Right.
yeah, he's got trauma after trauma after trauma.
So
Also, the more traumas you experience, the more likely that you can end up with acute stress disorder, PTSD.
yeah, and gosh, and Sam and Dean are. It, you look at what they do, what they go through. They're superheroes.
Yeah.
They really are. You know, they have the alter egos that they're constantly having to use. They have they even have their Alfred with Bobby. He's constantly helping
Oh,
them
I love Bobby.
get stuff done. They have their other heroes like Castiel that works with them. They interact with some supervillains like Crowley and Yellow Eyes. Like
You
they
know what?
are,
They're the Bat family.
yeah, they really. As I was
Yeah, because 'cause they're
watching it, I
dealing
was
with all
like,
these
huh,
supernatural things that have powers and other things, and here they are, just most of the time just human, not always, but most of the time just human,
yeah,
have their all their weapons and arsenal, and they're not rich, but they just, do credit card fraud.
yeah, absolutely. They make it happen. And yeah, but yeah, and so they legitimately, just like with superheroes, it's like they don't have the time, they don't put a lot of time into taking care of their mental health, because when they take time to do that, that's time that they could be spending helping people.
Oh, yeah.
And when
Mhm.
you compared them to like soldiers in the military, one of the first things I thought about was, whenever soldiers are on like deployment, wherever they're deployed, are they able to get things like therapy and mental
Mm.
health treatment while they are there? Or is it something where it's like after the deployment is over, you can come home and then get assigned that?
So, I actually know multiple psychologists who have um, been military psychologists. So you can be in the reserves, you can be active in the military. Um, and so it's a complicated question. So there is access. Now there didn't used to be. So, let's say if there's a Vietnam vet listening in, they're like, excuse me, what are you talking about?
Right.
But nowadays there's a lot more understanding of how important the mental health side of things is. And also trying to you're you're going to get better outcomes even with someone in the military in combat situations if you give them outlets to heal and process, rather than it being black and white where they're pushing themselves too hard to the point where then they break, right?
Hmm.
But it is complicated because when it comes to a therapist within, say, the military, your your client in a lot of ways is, yes, okay, the person you're working with, but also the military. And so you're
Hmm.
trying to make sure that that person can work their job to the best of their ability. And so you're of course providing them with quality care, because quality care is how you help someone be able to do their job. But it can be really, I mean, that's a really tough spot to be in, being in the military, needing something, and um, knowing that not all the time by any means, but you might have to medically retire or be med boarded, where you end up having to leave the military because of an injury, whether it's physical, mental, or both.
Hmm.
And so it can be tricky when you're getting those services through the very place that you don't want to have to leave. But those services are absolutely there.
Right.
And they're also getting better too at trying to connect like the DoD and the military type services with post-military VA veteran services
Yeah.
so that there's smoother transitions. It's definitely not perfect by any means,
Right.
but it's a lot better. I mean, I've only been around for so long, but my understanding is it's getting a lot better
Yeah.
over time. But yeah, they absolutely can have access to services, but it's kind of like I'm hoping this is not an incorrect comparison, but I could see some comparison to like when you have, say, a football player who has to do the concussion tests and
Hmm.
like tests for TBIs and whatnot. They want to make sure they pass the test so they can keep playing.
Right.
So those services, that help is there, but a lot of times it can be complicated to connect with it.
Okay. Gotcha. I got you. And so eh, with with Sam and Dean, because yeah, we'll definitely shift to Sam in a sec, because the whole meet your heroes thing really struck a chord with me,
Oh yeah.
as especially as yeah, it really did. But with with Dean, they didn't even show a lot of it. They in this episode, it was just quick
Huh?
that
I
quick
loved
brief
that
moment.
actually.
It was
Yeah.
super quick, which is honestly how it happens. It doesn't take a lot for
Mhm.
it to for you to get that kind of jolt. Colleen and I were in a car accident last year,
Mm,
and it's one of those things, like, even now I'm a little bit more jittery on
yeah.
the road. Like, I'm like, whoa, they were really close to me. Like, I still kind of
Mhm.
jump, because even though, like, we were both fine, that we weren't injured or anything like that, it was still one of those things where it just was really nerve
Yeah.
wracking, and it was such a
And
bad
and here's the thing.
experience.
The tricky thing is there's a lot of things about PTSD that it's your brain. You, your brain's supposed to be doing these things. It's just not completing the process entirely, or it's getting stuck, or it's doing the process too much in some ways. And so what I mean by that is what you're describing. So we're supposed to learn from what happens.
Hmm.
And the larger an experience is, good or bad, we the more impact it has, the more we want to be able to respond to those things in the future. Your brain is taking in this information and there's a reason for it.
Right.
But it can overlearn. It can become stuck on this thing could happen, and so it's always looking for the potential. And
Hmm.
so it makes sense that, okay, let's live and learn and hopefully decrease the potential for a car accident. Ironically though, if you have PTSD, you could then become so hyper focused on avoiding, say, a car accident, that you're paying attention to too many things and your brain can't prioritize, and then your attention's too split.
Hmm.
Also, you're probably not sleeping well, you're getting agitated, there are all these, being on high alert all the time, the
Yeah.
system wears out, it can't function as well. And so ironically, PTSD, it's working so much in overdrive, it's working against you, when
Hmm.
these are the very things that are supposed to help us live and learn. But
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. It doesn't have to take much, and I love that it was something just, it's just a random piece of artwork. People have talked about certain times during the weather, depending on where they served in the military and where certain combat situations happen. And by the way, I know we've talked about this before, but if there's anyone more newly listening, PTSD is not a combat specific thing. There are a
Hmm.
lot of different types of traumas
Right.
that can happen: sexual assaults, for example, physical assaults. harassments of a variety of sorts, natural disasters, even car accidents, like you were mentioning. Things where there's not a perpetrator are less likely to cause PTSD, but it happens absolutely.
Hmm.
So, um, just wanted to say that aside. But people who the trauma happened in a certain kind of type of weather. If that weather hits, then they start having more triggers or more flashbacks.
Hmm.
Or maybe there's a certain person, a physicality that is like someone that was involved in the trauma that can cause react. They're all these seemingly innocent things that can cause those reactions. So I agree. I liked that they did that. Another thing I really like about Dean and his character, especially in this season, is he's dealing with I mean, he literally went through hell.
Hmm.
And now he's around most everyone he's around will not get it
Right.
ever. They can't, and this is why I keep going back to like combat veterans. Um, will not get it ever. Uh every now and then he finds someone who connects to it in a certain way, and he gets drawn in with them. That's
Right.
a tie that they have. But I love that they show all this and you see him falling apart and falling to pieces, and yet he's doing his job
Yeah.
every day. And he's got these different, he's got his brother and other people. Is it rocky sometimes? Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's still doing all these things. And so what I like about that is sometimes PTSD breaks you down to the point where you can't leave your house, you aren't able to connect with people, and everything breaks down. That absolutely can happen. And also, you can have PTSD, be miserable, have a lot going on that is hurting you, and it if someone's not paying attention, you look just fine.
Right.
And so Dean pulls it off with it wears down on him more and more,
Hmm.
which is also very realistic. But Sam's really the one who really notices there's something off here. But a lot of times he's able to hold it together and it be Dean in all these other places, even
Yeah.
though he's just completely destroyed inside.
And later on, he does end up having like a huge kind of breakdown
Mm-hmm.
where it's kind of where he like admits to Sam like some of the stuff he went through, some of the stuff that he had to do, some of the
Yep.
stuff he thought he never would do. Like he has like a whole thing where he like tells him everything that happened and just how horrible it
Yep.
was.
He
And so it's
even
yeah.
he even has some things that I would say relate to moral injury. There's
Hmm.
another thing that really tied to me with the military. So moral injury is this piece of um the things that you ethically believe are right and wrong in a peaceful state is different than how you might respond and do things in combat scenarios, in wartime, in these other situations. And so this
Oh.
moral injury of I mean, it's just one example, but
Hmm.
the most obvious example of you do something that results in someone else's death and you
Right.
do it on purpose.
Hmm.
If it's in If it's, here in Austin, that's usually called murder.
Right.
If it's in combat,
It's war.
it's war.
Right.
That's the expectation in a lot of ways. Um, and so there's a moral injury piece that comes up with Dean too, where he struggled, like you said, he's struggling with these things that he did given where he was and what was happening.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's so disconnected from who he was before and where he's at now, back on the earth, not in hell, that there's this huge struggle for him.
And it's interesting that you bring that up, like the difference between like what's okay in like wartime versus what's okay like normally. Because in this episode, Sam is also dealing with something similar because I think like
Oh,
there's
right.
this whole plot line where he's drinking like devil blood in order to be able to exorcise demons
Yep.
without killing the host. Like that's the
Yep.
whole thing because before they have this knife that'll kill demons, but it's still stabbing the host. And Sam is like, well, I know what I'm doing right now is bad, but it's saving more people if
Hmm.
I do it this way.
That was a
right?
big theme in this episode because the
Yeah,
angels were the same way where it's like doing something destructive or doing something that is seemingly bad on the surface but
yeah,
for the greater good because the
yeah,
angels were they essentially wanted to destroy a town to save the world because they're
right,
saying let's not let the seal open because that can lead to the devil later da 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 we this is too dangerous, let's just kill everybody in this town. And then here you
yeah,
have Sam over here, who they're ironically judging because he's drinking demon blood so that he can exorcise demons, like you said, without killing the hosts.
yeah,
Once again, something that everyone's telling him is wrong. It's probably not great that it's demons' blood, all
right,
these questions. But at the end of the day, he's like, but here I see in front of me how it's helping people survive. So, yeah, you
yeah,
do have all these threads of
yeah. And
just what are you willing to do for what you think is the greater good?
it shakes Sam up because Sam is, I mean, he even says it like he still has his faith, like he still prays to God, he
Mhm.
still believes in all of it. And so in his eyes, he never thought of angels being infallible. He never thought of them being like just soldiers that followed orders, and it really shakes him to
Yeah.
his core. And I mean, that's something that sits with you because it's like I think everybody has heroes where they're
Mm.
just like, man, that that's they're just the best. Like they're just awesome. I mean, I feel like we definitely saw, even just on a different scale, when going through the Me Too movement and finding out all of these
Ugh.
celebrities that we spent so much time loving were capable of doing some really heinous, horrible
Even
things.
now, more people are popping up. I'm like, can't you people keep it in your pants so
Like,
that I can
yeah,
just
or
enjoy
just
your
be
art
a good part,
without
or just
ethically
ask
worrying about,
permission.
yeah,
Just ask permission. Right. And it's one of those things where it's like it can shake you. I mean, especially if this is like musical artist that you love or an actor that you love or even a family member. I mean,
yeah,
a lot of us look up to our parents as heroes, and finding out once you grow up and you find out, oh, they were they might have been doing the best they could, but they were not the best, right? Like even finding out
and some
stuff
of
like
them weren't even
that,
doing the best they could. Yeah,
right? Even finding out stuff like that can really, really shake people up because I feel like there's that moment where either you can say, I'm just going to keep following this person and believe that they can do no wrong and their word is bond and their word is law. Or I can say, no, I disagree with that. And that's not
yeah,
okay. And that's what happens in this episode because Sam's like, really? The angels are going to just destroy this entire town
which
just
to
to.
be fair, I think shows that Sam was grown up in Christianity that ignored the Old Testament.
Yeah. Well,
I think there are
yeah.
signs that God and the angels are willing to get their hands dirty
Well,
based on those
yeah.
scriptures.
And as someone that grew up exactly like how Sam did, well, not not exactly, but as someone that grew up in church and grew up just like believing and having a ton of faith, I mean, it shakes me I'm shaken even now when it comes to my faith. Just because like you grow up hearing like, oh yeah, this is how it is. God is love, da 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 da. And then you just see all this horrible stuff happening and you see which sides the supposed people of faith and the people you
Mm,
grew up believing in, which sides they're taking in all of this, and it will like legitimately depress you and bring you to your knees because you're like, what? This isn't what you taught me. This isn't what it was supposed to be. And that's the
yeah,
situation that Sam is in. It's like, this is who I've been praying to. Like,
yeah,
this is the people. Like, I've been trying to strive to be like you, and you're a monster, right? Like that's how he felt. And so like I really that sat pretty hard with me because I feel like
yeah,
when it comes as someone that still does attempt to practice their faith, it is something that is extremely difficult to get past when you have these glass shatter moments of they're not the good guy.
You know, I think what Sam really comes across here is religion can be religion can actually be something strong that helps someone's mental health, and it can also be something that tears a person's mental health down. And so one of the things I think that happens for Sam is like you were saying, you it seems like you can relate and you're like, I bet I can guess what kind of teachings he had and what he was raised in with it. And I think one of the complications there can be is we want to we want to understand life. We want life to be predictable. We want it to be fair and just. And religion can either blindside us where it creates this facade and 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 claims that there are ways that existence will be if you follow certain practices that just aren't realistic, or religion can be a powerful tool to help accept how life is and to move through the things that aren't fair, are chaotic.
Yeah.
And so with Sam, I feel like he's realizing these simplified versions of religion that he, in some ways it's understandable, was really holding on to, because here he is, someone, he was raised as a hunt. Oh, so his mom dies, but so he was so young he doesn't remember her,
Hmm.
violently by a demon in their house. And his dad raises him as a hunter, literally from a very young age, before he could talk, probably.
Right.
And then he leaves and he says, I'm not doing this anymore. And he
Right.
goes off and he's actually going to be a lawyer, I think. And then his
Hmm.
girlfriend dies the same way his mom
The
did. So he's
exact same way from the
flung back
exact
into this
same.
life.
Yeah.
He's got all this violence around him. He's got all these things. It makes sense that he is so drawn toward trying to have this
Something to latch on
pure
to.
sense. Yeah, this pure, simplified sense of religion and beliefs. And here it is, just thrown in his face that life is way more complicated than that. And he has to figure out how to, kind of similar to what goes on with PTSD. It's just a different thing, but
Hmm.
he has a conflict of faith and having to figure out, how do I not overcompensate? Just like with trauma, how do we not overcompensate for what happens and we just live in a series of reactions? How do I not overcompensate and throw everything out that I believe and stand for? But also, how do I adapt now that I'm seeing this thing I can't unsee?
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I do love, and it's unfortunately not something that that really happens in this with the religious aspect that he's dealing with, but Castiel comes and even talks to them, and it's like I feel the same way that you do
I know, an
about
angel
things,
who's conflicted, and it's like, what do
right?
we do with this now?
And I'm like, oh, okay, good. It's not just me. And
Yep.
it's like there's a part of me that hopes this is how it actually is. Like, it's and it's such a great show because like it does do such a I mean, it's on the apocalyptic scale, but it's still these everyday things that people deal with. These two brothers that are also partners that have this job to do, that also are reeling from the effects of how they were raised. And
Yep.
they still have this huge thing throughout the entire show where it's like, we can't just keep these secrets. We need to
Mm.
talk about things, even if it's just with each other.
And
It's
then
this
they keep
reoccurring
they
thing.
yep, and it like it gets so tiring, y'all, after
Mhm.
like season 10. But here's the thing, yeah, they keep keeping the secrets, doing the things, and then they got to learn the lesson over again, and it's like laughable at the end. But that's so human.
It is.
It's ridiculous how much we do this to ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's just, it's so hard to change these patterns. it's laughable when you see it on the show, or it gets annoying, or you're like, "Oh my god, can they write something new?" And at the same time, it's so realistic.
Yeah.
And I also, one of the things that occurred to me while you were talking about this too, that I hadn't thought about with this show before, and actually this season, I believe maybe it's the last one too, but uh, they actually things become more and more expansive and more on a supernatural scale, and they have to really struggle and deal with the fact that things have gotten so big and so wide
Hmm.
because they are just two people.
Right.
But one of the things that I was realizing with it too is I also love how the show in itself shows how to survive and to handle and to get through these big unimaginably big chaotic things that
Hmm.
we can't handle, we can't control. There are literally like demons and gods and angels and everyone fighting, and they're just two humans, and then they have their monster of the week.
Hmm.
That's what they can control.
Right.
That's what they can have influence over. And so they even actually was it I can't remember if it was this episode or not. No, maybe it was the monster movie one. I can't remember. There's one of these episodes where every now and then they go, let's just go somewhere
Let's
and
just
do
work
our
a case.
thing and
Yeah.
work a case.
Yeah.
That's them recentering and saying, let me focus on what I have control over. Can't I can't make these. I'm not an angel. I'm not a god. I'm not a devil. I'm not a demon. I guess sometimes they are, but most of the time they're not. This is too much. Let's work a case.
Yeah.
Let's do a monster of the week. Yeah, I've never put that together, but it is a really nice analogy for how do you just deal with life.
Yeah. I do love it. And the thing is, let me just say, this show went for 15 seasons, and it went for 15 seasons for a reason.
Oh, the
I
chemistry of the cast
The
and just
chemistry of the
everyone working on the
cast is
show.
so good. And I'll say this: seasons 1 through 5 are my favorite.
Yeah.
Seasons 6 through 15 are still good. They're still good. Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say, because I was a fanboy of this show and I stuck by it. And like I said, if I had to pick my favorites, it's season 1 through 5.
Yeah.
Season 6 through 15, though, there's a
Well, I would
reason
say
they're there.
even like
There's a reason this show stood the
6 through
test of
8,
time.
6 through 10 are still like solid. I would just
Right.
say that things get a little repetitive at times. Once again, ironically, that's a pretty realistic thing about the
But the
show.
monsters of the week were what made it great.
The monsters of the week are always great. Um, it is a really great show. I love it so much, and they have the monsters of the week, but you also just get to hone in on these characters. uh, Dean and Sam Winchester, Jensen Ackles, Jared Padalecki, they do such a good job of honing these characters. You even have this, they were raised by their father, and yet he was always at a distance even though he was always there.
Hmm.
He was dealing with the trauma himself of their mom dying. There's just uh, Dean essentially becoming a parent at a young age to his brother. There are all these interesting facets to the characters in the show, and you even get to see other characters. And
Yeah.
you see Bobby, essentially their pseudo father at this point, go through things. You see Castiel, the angel, go through stuff. I
Yeah.
love his storyline. You And there are plenty of other characters too, but yeah, the character stories are phenomenal, and there's always jokes and fun, and I don't know, it's hard to get that chemistry right for a show where it's so psychologically and emotionally interesting
Yeah.
and compelling, while also being lighthearted and funny and goofy.
Yeah.
And I think they
They nailed it.
most of the time they nail it.
They nailed it.
95% of the time they nail it.
Yeah. I absolutely love them.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Emilia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keeden Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JBS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. same bat time, same bat channel.